The theme for the next discussion is, what does sustainable development mean for the next Arctic generation? And Teppo, please join me on the stage. Teppo is going to host the next discussion, but you're not alone. We have great speakers here coming with you. We have Daria Matveenkova, who is a press secretary and project coordinator, Nature and Youth from Murmansk, Russia. Welcome. We have Mikkel Näkkäläjärvi, who is the president of Social Democratic Youth of Finland. We have Sunna Kokkonen, who is a student, former chair of Barents Regional Youth Council. And then we have Lars-Otto Reiersen. Well, you already knows Lars-Otto. So, have fun.
Thank you, Julius. And welcome to the final session of today. So as Julius told you, we will be discussing what does sustainable development mean for the next Arctic generation. For presentation, my name is Teppo Säkkinen. I'm a student at the University of Lapland, former president of the Finnish Center Youth, and hopefully a future master of social sciences. So here's a first lesson for the next Arctic generation. Each of us needs to study at some point. Now, I'm a local of Rovaniemi, and I've been in this very theater watching on this stage a play, a very famous and exciting play, The Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, where you know the story goes that the pirates are looking for a hidden treasure. Now, when we are listening to a discussion about the Arctic development, sometimes one of the narratives is that there are some buried treasures in the Arctic and we're trying to get to them, hopefully not pirates though. But what we will be discussing here is about treasuring the future for the next Arctic generation. So we have a great mix of panelists here that were introduced to you by Julius. It's an intergenerational mix. So what I've been asking Mr. Lars-Otto to do is kind of passing on the baton as a senior Arctic figure that has seen through it all. I'm asking you to challenge us, to represent us where we are coming from and what's up next and what are the challenges for this generation to solve. So welcome to this discussion. Let's try to be relaxed. I will give the floor to the audience at some point, and let's try to be practical and get to a concrete level. So Lars-Otto, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you. I'm sorry that you will see me again speaking, but I must say I look upon myself nearly as a half geriatric hippie, you know, standing here, born just after the end of the Second World War, working more than 25 years in the Arctic, and then shall tell you something. You will hand over the torch to you, and you will handle the problem we haven't managed to solve. And I have 5 minutes, nothing more, nothing less. Well, this gentleman here, an old Arctic indigenous person, he has followed me for 25 years. And he was very concerned when we started our journey. He has his lesson from his life, and he was viewing what was coming, the contaminants, the climate change, and how on earth to survive in the Arctic. And now, after 25 years, something have happened in a good side, but there are new challenges. And I will touch upon some of them, which we are handing over to the next generation. Prior to the session, you asked me to choose one goal from the sustainable goals, and sorry, I chose two. And of course, the first one is the climate change. The climate change is the main challenge today, not only for the world, but extremely for the Arctic. And this is a figure, I've heard it 3 times referred to today, so it looks like this figure has made its way from the AMAP conference in April and the ministerial meeting in May, because 3 persons in earlier today referred to what you see here. This is what people are talking about. It's the annual mean of the globe of an increase of temperature. We should try to stabilize it on 2 degrees. Well, that's the Paris Agreement. And what you see here is nearly the Paris Agreement. It's the RCP 4.5. And this is what I call the road to hell. That is, if nothing is done. But don't look on average temperature on the globe. If you go to Helsinki, Oslo, Stockholm, from 60 degrees to the North Pole, you will face this figure. And if you follow the Paris Agreement, or just above, you're ending on 5 degrees. From 60 degrees north. And if you don't do anything, you're up on 10. Again, don't look too much on averages. If you take the 6 months from November to March, the model tells us that in this period, that's very weak. We're up to 7 degrees, plus minus a degree here on average, but up to 10, 11, 12 degrees if you don't do anything. So even if you do follow the Paris Agreement, I can tell there's a hell of water coming out here. The ice will melt. There's no ice left in Russia before we are coming here. Greenland will be the main driver, and is it on the brink today? So far, the expansion of the molecules because of the heat has been the main level increase of sea level rise. But Greenland will take over, and that will run, the Arctic will run the sea level rise. Not affecting Greenland, because when the ice in Greenland is melting, Greenland is coming up of the ocean. But this is affecting so low land, mainly in Bangladesh, in India, and some of the flat areas in Florida, in China. They will face this. There will be much higher sea level rise than what IPCC told us a few years ago. We are in a state not to do, what AMAP says in the last report is the minimum sea level rise. We didn't go into say anything about how much the maximum might be because it was so uncertain. So we are giving a figure. And today, the SWEPA science report is out. This is you can go on the AMAP website and you can read all of this. There are hundreds of pages documenting this. This is one of the key messages that we're bringing in. The Arctic will change, no doubt about that. But that will affect the southern part of the globe. With sea level rise and with extreme weather. We have already seen the first part of this. And this is what you will have to take and handle in the future. The people in the Arctic have had a rather stable period for 10,000 years. When the first hunters followed the ice, looking for food, and have stayed there. Of course, you have had abrupt changes, but not as fast and dramatic as we have ahead of us, as you will face here. We have worked a lot with the pollution, and we have solved many of the problems. But what AMAP report also launched this spring shows that we see new contaminants coming to the Arctic. There are new chemicals who shouldn't pass the test system. The REACH system doesn't stop them. Because there are possibilities to get on market new chemicals that hasn't been tested for long-range transport, for what happened under low temperature, and what are the effects of the degradation products. And these windows allow that you see new chemicals coming into the market, and they are spread in the environment and spread to the north and the rest of the world. So, the third problem you will face, and that is of course a problem very few are speaking about, and that is the increase in human population. Due to the increase in birth rate, but also that I'm living longer than my father. And we will eat and consume more, so the pressure on the resources will increase for the near future, until 2100. So you will have to handle a combination now of the pollution, of the climate change, of the increasing population. And when you have an increasing population and pressure on the resources, where on earth shall they move? When the sea level rise is coming up 0.5 meter in Bangladesh, millions of people have to move. And of course, one of the open area is the boreal forest and the area further north, in Europe, Asia, and North America. And of course, a migration to the north will also affect the Arctic. The temperature is soon quite nice in Rovaniemi and Tromsø, and that will be attractive. So that is one of the scenarios you will see, even with this figure that you're ending up here on Paris Agreement. You will face a challenge that a lot of people will move. There's been a discussion about 1.5 degrees. The goal should be 1, but we're passing 1.5 degrees before 2050. If you want to come down to 1.5 degrees and lower, it is not enough to go to zero emissions. You have to harvest carbon out of the system. And you shall not spread sulfur in the atmosphere to stop sun radiation. You need to harvest the carbon out. Because sulfur in the radiation effect doesn't stop CO2 effect on ocean acidification, etc., etc. So, ending here, my second goal is goal number 8. Because when we did our study, adaptation to a changing Arctic, the people living in the north, they didn't see the climate change as the main problem. The problem was to have jobs, economy, so we could stay here. So you need to develop sustained economic development of the areas, both in the north, in the south, so people can work where they are, have a chance to stay there at the same as you handle the climate change. So these two goals for me are the main challenges. The others are the two, but I think these are so important to keep people living in the Arctic and also further south to reduce the movement. So I think I end here. I leave the floor and the future to you. Hopefully one of the new emerging leaders is sitting here. My last picture is these two guys. They really broke the ice. They dared. Gorbachev dared to take the step. And Ronald Reagan was on their own. So who is the new emerging leaders among you? The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Lars-Otto. Please join me for a moment. I'd like to ask a couple of questions from you. Now, last night and today I learned that, and in addition to being a self-described geriatric hippie, you are a treasure trove of information about the Arctic cooperation and its history. Now, the challenges that you presented for us seem enormous. So, as a form of encouragement, I wanted to ask you, has there been examples of problems like these that have been tackled in the Arctic cooperation during the last 20-30 years?
Not as huge as this, what we face today. Of course, we had a big problem when we saw effects of the pollutions of newborn babies. How on earth, how could you explain that people living in the north where you hardly have any sources could be exposed more to persistent organics and mercury? And that was a big challenge, how to communicate that message. And as far as I'm told, when the first Canadian scientists who saw this problem in northern Quebec, and it came on the radio by a journalist who didn't think that this could have any effects, the effect was that the mother gets so scared that they stopped giving mother milk to the children. They gave them milk you could have on can to having in coffee. So there was a much more dramatic effects on the newborn babies because the weight went down. They didn't get the fat they needed, they didn't get the food. So this was a way of telling us the way we are communicating the problem is as important as the problem. Don't create a bigger problem by the way you communicate this.
Second question I'd like to ask you is the goals that you chose by breaking the rules, but I will give that to you because it was such a good choice that you had the climate action goal number 13, and the goal on economic growth and how to gain jobs, goal number 8. And I guess that's the hitting the nail on the head of the trouble, the challenge that we have ahead of us. How to ensure that we have jobs, we have growth, we have economic development, and by that we can afford education and healthcare and social services, and to tackle climate change. So are these goals, can they be combined?
Yes, they can. You have to start to work in a way that you don't harvest in a way that you contaminate. And you have to use the energy that is not producing CO2. And there is a lot of possibilities to get energy to a lot of daily work that we don't use. When I was a student back in 1972, I was a part making a sun collector on the roof of biological building in University of Oslo in February. And we had some what we call red alcohol in it so it don't freeze. And it was only a radiator and a glass and a tank. And after 3 weeks, the whole thing exploded because it was so warm. So we, young scientists, we calculated there was so much sun energy coming in that you could use this type of black collecting plates all over Norway and supply all the energy you needed in the summertime to heat up the water you needed for warming, etc. And for washing your clothes, etc. You don't need 100 degrees, you need 40 degrees. So enthusiastically went to the Minister of Energy and said, well, can we have some money to do more science here? And said, no, you're kidding. We have waterfalls and we have oil. Forget it. So this is just to illustrate that you have to be dare to see new solutions. You can build new buildings. You can use the energy that is coming from the sun in many ways that we don't do today.
Yeah, perhaps works with the scientific community and the business community to reach these goals. Yeah. Okay, please join us for the discussion. So before we move on to the main part of this session, I asked each of the young panelists to choose one goal, prepare a pitch, a short speech describing why they chose the goal, what could be done to achieve it, why it is particularly important for the Arctic. But before we go on with this, did any thoughts arise from Lars-Otto's presentation? Or are you baffled by the challenges? Sunna, please. And I'd like to really commend Sunna because we had another panelist coming, but she had to cancel, and Sunna came by week's notice from all the way from Netherlands. And she's a student there studying Arctic governance and international law.
Exactly, yeah. So you mentioned that we have bigger challenges than we have ever had, but I would also see that we have better cooperation than we have ever had. 25 years this panel wouldn't exist because there was Iron Curtain like dividing us from Russia than Soviet Union. We have more communication than ever, so we can see as more unified than ever.
So there's a note of hope. Shall we?
I think we can cover everything in our speeches.
All right. So the first one to represent the goal that you have chosen is Daria Matveenkova, all the way from Murmansk, Russia, and you work as the press secretary of Nature and Youth. And you also told me that you love skiing and trekking, and I think that's something that really unites Arctic youth. Sure. So please, Daria, the floor is yours if you want to use the sofa or step ahead.
So hello to everyone, it's really a pleasure to be here to participate in the Arctic Spirit conference, and it's also a great time to come back to Rovaniemi where I was during my university times, several times. And yes, while we are preparing for the panel discussion, we had the home task to choose one United Nations sustainable goal, and my choice was goal number 7. It's reliable and sustainable energy. And for me, as I'm working in a environmental organization, this is really important one, because it's clearly understandable now that we can't live without energy. On our industries, farms and households, everything based on energy. But just imagine, in modern century, in 21st century, every fifth people on the planet doesn't have any access to the electricity. It's about 1 billion people who mostly live in poorer countries, Asia and Africa, but not only. These people do not have any access to electricity, and they still use wood and coal or even animal dung just to heat the house and cook their meals. And according to different researchers, about 5 million people die every year because of air pollution. And one of the reasons for air pollution is burning of hydrocarbons, oil, gas and coal. So when we are talking about sustainable development of the Arctic region, we should definitely talk about sustainable energy. And sustainable energy can be based on hydrocarbons, because burning of hydrocarbons, oil, gas and coal dangerous for pollution into environment, into air. And also this is a really important reason for climate changes, which already struck a lot of people all over the world. It's really a hot point now 1,000 people in the Bonn trying to discuss how to implement Paris Agreement, and now every government invent measures how to reduce carbon emissions. It's really important. Also, sustainable energy can be based on nuclear power, because nuclear power threats us with dangerous radioactive emissions to the environment. As well, it's really harmful because every year it produces 1,000 tons of spent nuclear fuel and radioactive waste, which is now we can't reprocess it now because we don't have these technologies. So this is not sustainable energy. It's really dirty and important or expensive energy. As well as many environmentalists think that sustainable energy can be based on usage of big, really large hydropower stations, because in that cases we flood big areas and we destroy ecosystems and we destroy species of animals and plants which were in these territories. So when we're talking about sustainable energy, it should be definitely based on renewables. Development of windmills, of solar energy, it's energy of sea waves and energy of streams. And even usage of some thermal sources of energy, like our colleagues in Ireland already use it. And also we should increase energy efficiency. We can estimate energy efficiency as another clean source of energy, because there is no need to produce more energy if we can just use rational and effective which we already have produced. And Of course, we should talk about system changes from every level, from the level of like bottom-up level, from the level of households to the really levels of industries, big industries who use a lot of energy. And this issue of energy issue is quite important for the Arctic region because in our region, we still have more or less positive situation about the development of the clean energy. We have wind parks, we promote energy effective systems. Yes, and so we have really like essential experience of transition to the clean energy we already have now. And we can transfer this experience to other regions of the planet and even of Europe who are now not really well qualified in the development of renewables or energy efficiency. As well as Arctic region is unique ecosystem. It's a really beautiful one, but it's really fragile. And Arctic ecosystem, it's suffered small from climate changes. Every natural violation in the Arctic region can be irreversible. And for example, if we will continue to burn hydrocarbons, coal, oil and gas, our permafrost can melt, and it means dismantle of infrastructure, roads and buildings. We already can observe such results in some northern part of Russia, for example, on Yamal Peninsula. Yes, we can see it now already. So, if we're talking about sustainable energy, we should develop on every level, as already said. From the level of our house, like our moms teach us to switch on the light or to use some energy lamps. Okay, we definitely should do it. But also, we like a population, like civil society, like parties, organization, youth and non-youth organization should demand of our governments and decision-making people to develop this clean and reliable, sustainable, renewable energy. And of course, we should ensure access of every person on the planet for the electricity. So I think it's our choice, it's a clean energy, and we should not just talk about it, but invent specific measures how to do it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Daria, for a strong statement. One thing that came to my mind was that you were very strong about getting rid of oil and gas and coal. Many Arctic nations, on the other hand, have lots of economic interests in gas and oil, and it's also a big source of revenue for local communities and so on. So is there a way to transform the economic base? Is there a business interest in renewable energies?
So it's really it's an interesting question. As I'm a environmentalist, in a perfect situation, I want to say, okay, get rid of everything with spoil our nature, and oil and gas and coal as well. But of course, I understand that we can do it like right now, just at once, stop it and that's all. So I think if we make some drillings, we should do it observing high ecological standards, and we should organize every time assessments of the impact on the environment while we make some drillings. And we should develop technologies how to clean oil spills, because there are some technologies now, but they are not effective. So we can clean it in the Arctic region like it were in Mexican Gulf. Mm-hmm. Yes. So I think we should really invest into technologies. And but what point I really agree that we shouldn't drill in the Arctic region because it's most fragile. I think that Arctic region should be a kind of national park and without maybe like a few human activities.
All right. So I will open the discussion on this topic with the question that if we take the viewpoint of the 4 million Arctic inhabitants, we need to heat our houses, we need to power our industries, we need to get around to get to services and so on. So what's the base for sustainable energy production and consumption in the Arctic? Any ideas on this? Lars-Otto, when you've been traveling around the Arctic, have you encountered examples of sustainable communities that are building on self-sustained energy use, for example?
What you will face is that in huge area it's based on oil, burning oil. In Scandinavia you have the water plan, so the waterfall, so we have electricity that is not produced by producing CO2, so that's obviously an option, and you can see that's coming up in Greenland too. a lot of waterfall production of energy from the waterfalls. So that is an option in the north. There's a lot of water, and you can use that. But still, they are using a lot of burning of oil and gas.
Yeah, diesel motors.
Yeah, and you can use the sun energy. You can use different way of collecting the energy. So there are options to get rid of the burning of oil and gas and coal in the north. That's no question. It's the willing of how much you are spending of resources to get that in place. So that's possible. That's on the rest of the world.
Sunna, Mikkel, you want to step in?
I just completely agree with Lars-Otto, and I think that all Arctic nations actually have enough reverse and elevation to do that hydro energy. It's achievable, and it's one of the cheapest forms of energy to build small scale or medium scale. You don't need a big plant.
Yes, and of course we have lots of possibilities in the Arctic area to use also and produce more wind power also, and also I guess you mentioned earlier, but also the solar power has been the producing of solar power is much more cheaper nowadays. So even though we have a quite a bit dark winters, so we still have some possibilities to use and produce more by also by solar power. But it's a very important question in generally, because it's like well, it's also it's dark in the winter, but it's also very cold in the winter. So we need to use something. But I agree totally about that. We need to be less dependent on gas and oil and like this carbon energy. So
yeah. To summarize, I think you hit an important point there, that it's not only about the production but also the consumption side. We are losing a lot of energy and heat due to inefficiency and so on. So perhaps the intelligent networks and so on is one way to use energy better. So let's move on. Thank you, Daria, and let's have an applause for your presentation. Next one up will be Mikkel, and Mikkel is the president of Social Democratic Youth and occasional hockey player, comes from Inari and is also a Sami. So please take the stage.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I'm from the EU's northernmost ice hockey club, Tunturi Kiekko from Ivalo, which is quite an honor. But yeah, these sustainable development goals are very important, and actually have good memories about those, because 2015 I was United Nations Youth Delegate of Finland, and in UN General Assembly 2015 September, when this goal has been accepted. And in generally I feel that it's like very good that this have been done, but there may be that we can discuss later more about it. The problem has not been earlier in the history of United Nations that we cannot do these kind of agreements. The bigger issue is that how we can have a state like really real commitment of states to those goals. And I'm a bit afraid about bit concerned about these sustainable development goals also, and Paris Agreement also, that is it enough that what states are doing right now. But my pitch, I was asked that to choose one, what is my favorite, and I guess there are lots of like, for example, what Lars-Otto said before, which are very important also. But I chose goal number 9, which is industry, innovating, and infrastructure, and now we're going to talk about why it's important to the next Arctic generation. As first, Arctic is the home of many people and also animals which lives only in the Arctic area, and climate change like really threatens the unique nature of the Arctic area, as you all know. So that's why it's very important to promote solutions which prevents global warming and also protects species which are dependent on snow and ice. Arctic is also a very thinly populated area with long distances, and in the Arctic lives also many indigenous people, such as Samis in Finland, Norway, Russia, and Sweden, and Inuits in Greenland and in Canada, and other also. And those indigenous people are trying to maintain and develop the traditional way of living. And it's obvious that sometimes there are conflicts between industry, such as mining and, for example, between reindeer herding, for example. But as Lars-Otto mentioned earlier, we also need jobs. More as obvious is that also in the Arctic area, we need a diverse industry and different kind of working opportunities. If we want to maintain high well-being also in the Arctic area and also strong welfare states. So basically that's why I chose goal number 9, and I feel it is important to promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and increase the access of also to small-scale industry. And also one important topic of the goal number 9 is about infrastructure. Because transporting is one major cause of emissions, and in my opinion it's crucial to cut emissions if we want to prevent climate change and global warming. And especially in the areas where long distances, flying is very popular way of moving from one place to another. And I guess, of course, also most of people here also has flown here to Rovaniemi. And in some Arctic areas, for example in Finland and especially in Lapland, also in Rovaniemi, the tourism is very important, and it's growing quite fastly, especially from Asia and China. And in the same time, that's a bit problematic in my opinion, because it is naturally done by increasing of flying. It's global growth of flying is approximately 3 to 4% per year. It's predicted to be 3 to 4% per year for next 20 years. So it's growing quite fastly. And it's a very challenging combination in my opinion, but it's really crucial to the world to cut emissions globally, and flying is a big part of that. So to achieve that, proper infrastructure such as rail connections are necessary, and that's why also goal number 9 is important. But must say now that because we are in the Arctic, and but when we are planning this kind of and building new kind of railway infrastructure, for example, it is also important that local people and indigenous people are intimately in the process. So I would work for for goal number 9 by investing more to infrastructure, education, research and new technology. But I also think that also being here in Rovaniemi but also globally, we should consider on some ways how we can decrease flying, for example, by making some restrictions to shorter flights in, for example, in shorter domestic flights, for example, if you have opportunity to use railways, and also if you do that, you need to invest lots of infrastructure. In a nutshell, sustainable industry, promoting and supporting innovations and upgrading infrastructure is important to next Arctic generations, because those are ways to also increase well-being, prevent global warming, and maintain possibility to develop and maintain the traditional way of living here in Arctic area.
All right, thank you, Mikkel. You come up from a family of reindeer owners, and then on the other hand, you went on to study engineering. So you have a unique angle on something that people in Lapland discuss quite a lot. Is there a conflict between traditional livelihoods and the more industrial ones, the mining and forestry that are, for example, the biggest employers in Lapland?
Yeah, very good question. And actually, my father is also he's also engineer and living in Inari, actually, where my home is also in reindeer herding, and I own also some and have been working in reindeer herding. To me, it's obvious that especially in Sami area, Inari, Utsjoki, Enontekiö, and the northernmost part of Sodankylä, it's obvious that there is some conflict. For example, there were a couple of years ago, there were some findings about of diamonds in Utsjoki, and I guess local people, some people and reindeer herders and fishermen also were very concerned about the impact of what kind of impact mining could have, for example, to Teno River and also to reindeer herding area. So. But in the same time, I feel that all the mines are not same. The mines are not like brothers. So there's a different kind of mines. Some mines are also needed because if we want to live like this, have this kind of lifestyle that we all have iPhones and cars and computers, we also need some products of mining. So in my opinion, we cannot say categorize that we don't need mining and we should stop mining. But it's very difficult in Arctic area and very difficult in especially in those kind of areas where some people live and have a traditional way of living also. So the combining is a bit challenging.
One topic that is related to goal number 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, is actually reflected in the Finnish chairmanship goals. One of the themes is connectivity. So I open the discussion to everyone. What kind of connectivity do we need in the Arctic region? There are of course different realities. The very vast Canadian Arctic, the well-laid Arctic in Finnish Lapland, for example. Is it rails? Is it ICT communication networks? Flight routes? Ideas on this?
It can be good if we can somehow improve our flight connections. For example, my history personal. My way from Murmansk to Rovaniemi takes 3 flights. Murmansk, Moscow, Moscow, Helsinki, Helsinki, Rovaniemi. It's crazy. The carbon footprint is so big that I should just walk next 10 years. So if we can somehow improve, I don't know how to do it, but maybe some dream to improve, to make these flights connection really less. I think we can improve infrastructure. It's also, when we're talking about this goal number 9 about investments in infrastructure, it's about every goal of these United Nations Sustainable Goals. It has impact on everything. So we can somehow improve also and people well-being and just reduce time we spend our travel and reduce energy, reduce resources we spend on connections, at least.
Well, Lars-Otto and Sunna, do you want to take on this?
My first thought would be equality in connectivity, especially with, well, you mentioned the Canadian northern communities, because they don't have the access to, for example, fast internet or sometimes internet at all. I know a lot of Canadians and Canadian Indigenous people through my past in the international cooperation, and these people don't have the same chance that people in, for example, Ottawa or Montreal have, and that creates huge inequality, and youth cannot understand each other if they don't have the same chances, and then the prejudice and big differences are created.
Yeah, that's something that I can imagine many people in the more remote parts of Finnish Lapland or Norway or Sweden can also relate to. Lars-Otto, do you want to comment?
No, I think that's a key thing, that if you want to have people and young people to stay in the north, they need to have access to the electronic world, to the internet, etc. That can't be forgotten. They need that. If not, they will move.
Yeah.
To live there in a place where you don't have the connections, that's very difficult, or to keep the young ones. That's for sure. And of course, you have to look into how do you do the transport. The planes is a big problem. But sometimes in the world, you have to say that it's important that the people living there has a fast transport. So instead of building the railroad, the plane is the solution. That's in a wider perspective, you have to accept some CO2 emissions. We have to come into a place where we know are making a strategy where we are going down from 100% CO2 down to maybe 10% CO2. And in that part, we have to give the areas that are far away from the centers, they have the right to use this. So you have to find a political agreement where you use the quota for CO2. because you can't choose to go by.
So it's an issue of accessibility also.
Yeah.
Mikkel.
Yeah, the reason why I'm talking about exactly about flying is that because world is very globalized, and it's flying which is especially growing very fastly, and if you want to cut emissions of transporting, so you need to cut all sorts of emissions, like not only cars which are working by benzene or diesel. You need to also cut flying petrol emissions. So it's like, because if you produce oil and if you want to produce petrol to airplanes, you in same time produce a different kind of parts of oil. So it's a bit difficult that if you say it's very like how can I say? If you say it like very briefly, it's like it doesn't matter how many electric cars we have in Finland, for example, or in Norway, if in same time the rates of how much people are flying in globally is raising up. So and that's sad, but that's the reason why I'm talking about this, because those are dependent on each other. So.
Okay. So let's move on from goal number 9, and the final presentation will be delivered by Sunna. And in addition to being the former president of the Barents Youth Council, you also told me that you'd like to live in a van, and perhaps you'd like to clarify that point as well and present your choice of goal.
Well, actually, that's one dream of mine, but I hope I don't need to do it in the Arctic in the middle of winter, because I would be pretty cold. But I'm talking about the goal number 8. No, actually goal number 12, sorry. Responsible consumption and production. And actually my dream has to do a lot with consumption, because if you live in a tiny space, you don't need very much, you consume very little. Actually, we all do. We vote with our choices every day, and our friends are really tired of me being such an idealist who's vegetarian and bikes everywhere and recycles. But I think you should never give up, and every decision you take matters. If you decide to buy new shoes, if you decide to buy them second hand, if you decide to eat meat, if you decide to have your lunch as tofu, if you decide to go pick up mushrooms and eat them for lunch, because in here in the Arctic we have that amazing possibility. And we have a huge role as consumers, but production is also a big part in Arctic production. The panelists have already been talking about important topics related to that here. All the pitches are really interlinked. And for example, energy is a hot topic. I was at the Murmansk Business Week last year, and the Russian Federation revealed their new Arctic goals. And that was devastating to hear. It was really sad, because they were going to emphasize the new shipping routes that will be revealed by climate change, that will stay open for a longer time. They were going to uncover a lot of gas and oil in the Arctic areas, such as the Yamal Peninsula in the north. And when the world should be going towards renewables, then this program, a huge country, 150 million people, is revealed. It doesn't feel very nice that here in tiny Finland we're taking some action when this happens. But there is a lot of light at the end of the tunnel, I think. If you have been following news, yesterday the trial between the Naturen Ungdom, actually the same organization you belong to, and the state of Norway are going to court. The youth are suing the state for being responsible for not taking climate action and actually permitting drilling in the Norwegian part of the continent shelf. And it's really interesting to see how the trial proceeds. I am a little bit skeptical about it, the outcome, but at least it'll get a lot of media coverage. People's opinions will change, and actually what's the states do matters. But I think we all have a lot of power, and who knows, like, youth end up in the parliament all the time, and then we can make the laws. Another thing about sustainable production in the Arctic that comes to my mind is tourism, as I already mentioned. There's a lot to come, it's in the huge growth, but at the same time we need to keep in mind ethical and environmental standards. And as I come from Inari, as Mikkel, and I've grown up in the middle of Sami culture, it's really important for us in Lapland to actually do it in a way that respects the Sami people, includes the Sami people. Many safari companies in here, for example, present Sami people in a very offensive light, and it's straight up cultural appropriation that they do. The profits that comes from showing and introducing Sami culture to the visitors should go to the Sami people, should be conducted by the Samis. And that's my couple of thoughts about the production.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your choice of responsible consumption and production brings to my mind also from the production side of how do we replace materials that are fossil based in our production. For example, plastic that comes from oil is food possibility for using to build our products and so on. What is the alternative? Where can we find the other means of producing what we need?
People have been really creative about it, and I have to be really proud of my country, Finland, because, for example, Finland, a couple of months ago, I think, in the University of Eastern Finland, they developed a coffee cup that doesn't use any plastic in it, so that it's completely biodegradable. They are coming up with new solutions all the time, and what I think every young person can do, and what I did, is that I see something in the world that I want to change, and then I study what I want to change. Now I'm doing my master's thesis, I'll be soon ready. I was interested in Paris Agreement and Arctic climate change. So if you want to change the world, go and do it.
Yeah. Yes, I've been working in my, well, that's the person, of course. I've been working in my family's forest for a couple of weekends this autumn, and walking around there, I'm imagining what kind of products all these trees could be when they grow up in 60 or 70 years, and what kind of developments can be there to replace all this stuff that ends up in the oceans and so on. So I think that you touched on the topic of tourism, and also Mikkel mentioned it, that it's in the Arctic region. There's particularly here in Rovaniemi, there's a boom of tourism. Also in the oceans there is cruise ships going to Svalbard or crossing the Northwest Passage and so on. So it's a big economic opportunity, but there's also some ethical dimensions, also the emission dimension that was mentioned. What kind of guidelines do we need for the growth of tourism, and do you see it more of an opportunity or threat? And this is open for all of you. As Sunna mentioned that we need ethical guidelines, for example, for portraying Sami culture. Mikkel, I guess you agree.
Yes, I have actually just stopped to think that on which perspective I start to talk about it, because it's so many perspectives on this tourism topic in Lapland and in Rovaniemi. So, but yeah, the growth has been quite amazing. It's like was 20% of like 1 year ago. So also in the summertime, which has been very difficult, and earlier in Lapland and Rovaniemi to have tourism more in summertime. So that's one thing what I need that Lapland and Rovaniemi should also concentrate on. That's how we can get also summer tourism more, because it's like now it's very 4 months or something, or 5 months, which is like really high, and in summertime it's not that much, and it's a bit difficult to people who are working with tourism, that it's if you are half year without work basically. So, and actually now we have some companies have in Rovaniemi, some are having some struggle to get employees, but this ethical side is very important. But I feel also that about Sami culture, I'm Sami myself, and I have been like the whole life seeing this how this misusing of Sami culture with tourism and in TV programs and so on. But I feel that it's in last years it has been some good development also. One reason is social media, in my opinion, that nowadays if somebody is misusing or using some fake Sami gakti, so it's like in social media it gets like more like how can I say, it's like so you get caught if you are misusing, and the discussion starts immediately. I guess, for example, Pirita, who is sitting there in the first line, has been doing very important work on this topic, and I feel that people in southern Finland are not doing, most of people are not misusing in like that because they want to insult, but they don't just know, and that's also one thing that we should work on. That's how we can like develop, for example, education and other ways to get people more known about our own culture, like culture of indigenous people. So,
all right. I think so. Do you want to comment on this, Lars-Otto?
What I think that listening here is a positive signal. You have to challenge the way the previous generations have made the solutions. The way we produce material, the way we transport, you have to challenge. As you say, do we have to make the cup in this way? Because there are other ways to do it. And we need to question this and come up with new things to do this. And the same with tourism. Everyone is calling for tourism. Oh, we need more. That's a big business. But you have to regulate it. You have to put string regulations on the ships, on what they can, emissions from them, where they can go, etc., how to steer this. The world will need that, because we are so many people. And if everyone is going in that way, you can destroy much more than what you will gain from the economy. So this will need regulations, in addition to challenging the way you do the transport, the goods you're producing. So I think that's a good signal here.
Yeah. So I guess, like in many other discussions that we've had, we need guidelines for sustainable development. All right, I think we will be moving on to the closing session of our panel here. I will give each of you a final word on how you see good life for young people developing in the future in the Arctic. What about the prospects for that? But for the final mark, I noticed there in the first panel discussion that we had today between the diplomats that the representative of the United States Embassy mentioned that we need also the design aspect when we discuss sustainable development. So how should we bring design into this discussion? And I will welcome with me Päivi Tahkokallio, who is an entrepreneur and strategic designer, and also the mother of Arctic design, to describe how we can take these discussions into more concrete results.
Into actions.
Into actions.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Welcome.
I think it's very kind of you to call me the mother of Arctic design. I'll soon be joining Lars-Otto in this geriatric hippie department, so it's rather grandmother maybe at this point already. The words we have heard a lot today have included collaboration, communicating with all stakeholders. It's all about people. It's about including communities, local communities, local people. We've heard it's in the Arctic, for the Arctic, by the Arctic. Actually, this is what we in design call co-design or participatory design. And to offer you a possibility tomorrow to, besides talk about issues, very important discussions, important opinions, important talks, but if you really want to act, then I invite you to join a co-design workshop tomorrow afternoon. And the reason why is because what we also heard today, we need to find solutions. This has been mentioned here with this panel for more than one times. And another reason, not only to find solutions, but there's also an emergency. We are running out of time. So I'm offering a toolkit by co-design methods and design thinking methods. Now, the topic, the theme we will co-design tomorrow will depend on you. These panelists have picked up one of the social development goals they find most important. Shall we skip one of them?
Yeah, we had
And Teemu
5
will tell you
goals.
why.
And the number 7, affordable clean energy. Number 8, decent work and economic growth. Number 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure. And number 12, responsible consumption and production. We were discussing beforehand that number 13, climate action, is perhaps the most important of these goals. But on the other hand, it is the goal that needs to be reflected in each of the 4 previous ones. So I propose that we choose between the 4 that were mentioned before, and the workshop that Päivi will then guide on will find solutions to one of those, taking in mind climate action.
We take the winner tomorrow and work on that. We find a concrete task to work with, not the whole sustainable development goal. That's too big to do in 90 minutes, which we'll have tomorrow. But we will have a showcase. We will have a way to show you how design methods work when you try to find solutions to really wicked challenges as well. So the four sustainable development goals were number 7, which was sustainable energy, introduced by Daria, and the other one was there was another one, number 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure by Mikkel, introduced by Mikkel, and then number 12, introduced by Sunna, sustainable consumption and production, and number 8, introduced by Lars-Otto, and that was work and growth. So, with a raise of hands, you have one voice, one vote, and you can pick one of these 4 you would like to see worked on tomorrow in the co-design workshop. So, who...
All Finnish teachers say that the hand starts from the shoulder, so this that we can see.
Okay. So who would like to have sustainable energy worked on tomorrow? And Teppo will do the counting.
All right, thank you.
Okay. And then number 9, industry, innovation, infrastructure.
All right.
Okay, and then number 12, sustainable consumption and production.
All right.
And then the last one, number 8, work and growth. Okay, that was brave.
I guess that's also a goal that needs to be reflected in all the previous ones.
And do you agree, Teppo, that it seems to be well, you say which one?
I think it was the one concerning consumption and production.
Okay.
So, shall we choose that one?
Okay. So tomorrow, if you want to join this co-design workshop, it takes place at one of the last sessions. It begins 14:30, 2:30, and it's a 90-minute session. We close just before the concluding remarks here, and the venue for the co-design workshop is Saivo, not the ground floor, but one floor below, where some of you maybe had lunch today. So this is where we meet, and you are all welcome. It will be facilitated by myself and a colleague of mine, Simo Ronti, who is one of the leading service designers at the University of Lapland Faculty of Art and Design. So you will have a chance to work on sustainable consumption and production. We will propose a few concrete topics based on what has been discussed, especially with the young participants here, and then you get to pick up the final theme we will work on for those 90 minutes. Okay?
All right. Thank you very much, Päivi. And now we'll move on to the closing of the session. So panelists, final word, a short insight for us all on the future for the youth in Arctic. Daria, will you want to go first?
Okay, so thank you for this discussion. It was really a good one, and I'm happy that we chose with goal number. Which number?
7
about sustainable
12,
consumption,
yeah.
because it's about everything. It's about consumption and production of energy and infrastructure and water and food, about everything. So I really hope that we'll have active work tomorrow on the workshop so today was a day full of different discussions about sustainable development, and I will be really happy if every of us, when we you come back home, or if you're from Rovaniemi, next day we'll take some real measures what to do about sustainable development. How can we save our nature and our life and actually our future?
Thank you, Daria.
Thank you.
Mikkel.
So, what was the? Is this working? Yes. So, what was the question again? So, what kind of?
Good life.
How does the future look like, or what are
the key prospects for good life for us, this youth generation, for in the Arctic?
Yeah,
or anything else you might want to say?
I guess I understood correctly. So, but yeah, thanks for first of all the discussion mates, and I guess the world needs and Arctic needs all hippies, all age hippies, also geriatric hippies. So that's very important. The key prospects, I feel that it's like a. When I look at younger generation, for example, my friends, Sami friends, I feel that there is some like a good development, and the future looks good because younger generations are more educated, more active, and more into these things which are affecting, influencing also the Arctic area. So I'm feeling confident that we're gonna manage it. So.
All right, Sunna.
So thank you everybody in the panel and in the audience. It has been great, and I feel like there's a really positive vibe towards the future here. But I have to say that I actually dislike the word future, because as my friend, the leader of the Youth Arctic Coalition, Jerry Wesseling, says that he doesn't want to be a future leader. He wants youth like us to be the leaders of today, because we already are. It's our world already, and it's developing into that direction to most accelerating. Let's not think about the potential and actually do something.
An excellent point. And Lars-Otto.
Well, there's a strong say that the future is today, so you're right. I'm optimistic listening to these young people. There is a future tomorrow, but there are challenges, and you will have to cope with them. It was fantastic to grow up in Tromsø. Fantastic city and the nature, and it's been fantastic to see the rest of the Arctic and to see how you can handle and preserve some of this and develop that for the future. That's a big challenge. But the pressure from the south is huge.
Thank you, and thank you all in the audience for joining us for the final session. I hope you got some insights, some positive thoughts for the future. And dear panelists, thank you for joining us, providing your insights on these topics. And I promised to give you some questions, but please, after we are done with the session, go grab the sleeves of our participants and present your ideas and questions. I'm sure they are willing to share more than we are able to do here. Thanks a lot, Julius.
Thank you, Teppo. Thank you, the future of the Arctic. Thank you all young and old hippies and hipsters who were with us today here.